Right. Hmm. Sorry, I've got two monitors. I just want to make sure I can still see the chats. Sorry, once I started sharing, there we go. Let's see again. Everyone can see my screen? Yeah, great. There is a chat in the Zoom. I can't see the chat now that I'm sharing my screen. All right, here we go. Chat. Now I can see. Perfect. So while we wait for Jules and she just texted. Having internet problems will log in ASAP. Why don't I just get started with and kind of say the intent of this meeting is to, number one, go over all the content that you guys see on the agenda slide here in terms of an overview of the unauthorized transactions. That is the purpose of this meeting, the timeline, the finding, the retrospective, and the open Q&A. How I was hoping that we could run this would be that there is a chat in Zoom. And so I think it would make sense rather to have just kind of structure to the meeting and to kind of get to the main content is we would have me present these findings and these topics. If you have any questions, either while I'm going through this, I think it'd be great to put them in the chat. And that way I can be monitoring that and address it live. But if I feel like, hey, we're going to get to that on the next slide, then I'll say so. But then otherwise at the end, guys, once I've given the main points, then it's just going to be open Q&A, and we'll just call on people, and I'll be here as long as anyone wants to be in terms of asking questions if we feel like if there's still questions that want to be asked, or brainstorming on how to move forward, or anything that comes up during the course of this meeting. So this isn't necessarily, this is not like an official SEC meeting. I'm not planning on running it per like Robert's Rules of Order. This is more of a informational session to be as transparent as possible on some very serious issues that have been coming up within the SEC. And that's the purpose of this meeting, is to answer the questions from the members and the donors and anyone else that's interested. Kind of makes sense, guys? Do we have any concerns with running the meeting in this way that we want to flesh out before we get going? And I will take silence as a no to go ahead. And I see Jules is on now. So I think in this case, we'll go ahead and get started. And like I said, guys, if something comes up, you have questions, you don't want to wait till the end, just put them in the chat and I can see that on my second monitor. So maybe to get started, I'll just introduce myself because I'm a new face to probably a lot of people. So my name's Nathan Clefman. I volunteered and was appointed as the treasurer for LPIA on October 9th. And then it was about 1 week later that these events started coming to light. And so it's been a fun ride over the last 45 days or so. A bit about my history. I'm a native Iowan, went to college in Iowa, had my political awakening in Iowa at the University of Iowa, lived for 10 years in Texas, in Austin, Texas, where within the LP there, I ran for state rep and justice of the peace, and I served on the National Platform Committee, and I was the treasurer of a political action committee there for about 5 years. And then I recently had a job opportunity to move back to my home state, and I plan to be here for the rest of my life. And so I was really excited to then get involved in the Iowa Libertarian Party. I'm currently the chair of the Pottawatomie County Party. And yeah, I think that's a good start for this. And as the treasurer, we felt it would make sense for me to kind of present these findings, because a lot of it had to do with bank accounts and things that I recently got access to on November 4th. And I think the other thing that maybe is a positive of me presenting this is I don't know the history. I don't know the personalities, background on things. So maybe I'm kind of bringing a fresh pair of eyes to this as well. Texas is a highly functioning party, and so I've seen kind of my impression of kind of the right way to do things. And so yeah, but I think with that, let's get started. And the overview is kind of almost a rules of the road thing, right? As well, because what I'm going to be speaking about, guys, is again because I'm relatively new to Libertarian Party of Iowa. I'm just going to be speaking to what I can personally vouch for as treasurer, right? What do I have access to? What are the facts? What is the evidence? And that comes from things like Wells Fargo banking statements. It comes from comparing those statements to ethics reports that were filed. Are there things on those banking statements that were not reported and should have been, or were by definition then unauthorized, right? The other things we can talk about in terms of establishing timelines and addressing some of the concerns that have already been raised via various channels are things like when were different emails sent, what other public records can we speak to, and this is really going to be the focus of this meeting. There's certainly been information that I've heard secondhand, third hand, people telling me, well, they did it this way because of this, and I remember this. I'm going to try my best not to speak to that kind of unsubstantiated testimony or speculation, and by loaded terms, I mean things like using the word fraud or criminal or things that ultimately, as we're going to talk about, there is an active investigation with the appropriate police authorities of Iowa that's active and ongoing. So, there's just certain things that we want to be just very careful and strike the right balance. And we hope we can get people's, a charitable view of what's happened over the last 45 days from the perspective of striking that right balance, of wanting desperately to provide transparency to the members as these events played out. But also, again, I'm not a lawyer, but when we have legal counsel that and other people that were relevant, as we'll speak to, that's talked about, being careful about what you say during an active investigation, that kind of makes sense as well. So again, we're going to try to balance this meeting with giving information as transparent and open as we possibly can. And social media, the other thing, I'm not even on social media. I'm not on Facebook, so I am not going to be addressing any kind of disputes between individuals. I'm just going to be speaking to, again, the purpose of this meeting is what's been going on with these unauthorized transactions, the things that were discussed in our public SEC meetings, the things that was the purpose of that press release, to talk about, hey, at this point, we have handed over the evidence to the authorities, and we're now actively supporting them as they request more information. So at this point, we feel like, hey, let's say what we can say, because we don't want to wait for the police to take however long they're going to take to move forward. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, guys, is kind of go over the timeline just to ground ourselves on some of the key dates that, again, I've been able to ascertain in this view of a high level timeline, and then we're going to double click into some particular events. One is kind of the lead up to the transition of power of the SEC that was appointed on February 29th, 2020, namely the chair, Michael Connor Jr., and the treasurer, Amy Wickstead. And then we're going to double click as well into the judicial complaint that was filed on August 11th and withdrawn on September 7th, based on a missing a late ethics report that we were ultimately fined for. And then the rest of the double click will be into what transpired between October 15th and November 15th, which I'm calling the Kirkwood investigation. And I'm going to fix my, actually, I'm going to ignore that. So let's start talking through this now. So ultimately, yeah, it was February 29th that the new SEC was convened, and just calling out that there were multiple ethics reports filed from that point on, 514, 714. It actually wasn't until August 7th that Michael Connor was added to the Wells Fargo checking account. And the actually, as we'll see, the first unauthorized transaction per our analysis occurred shortly thereafter on August 24th. Nevertheless, there was an ethics report filed on October 14th. Another one I'm sorry, it wasn't filed on October 14th. It covered through the period of October 14th. These dates here at the bottom are referring to the coverage period, right? So for example, the one that says 12/31 ethics report, that covered from 10/15 to 12/31. The next one then covered from January 1st to June 30th. That one was the one that was missed. And again, we're going to double click into what happened when Mr. Porter raised an official complaint to the Judicial Committee, being concerned about the fact that this ethics report was not filed. It was shortly thereafter, 2 days later, that Amy Wickstead, the treasurer, resigned. It was several days after that, on August 22nd, that the ethics report was filed late, presumably by the chair, Michael Connor Jr. And then it was on September 7th that the SEC received an email. And again, I wasn't on the SEC at this time, but I've seen the email where Mr. Howe informed the SEC that the Judicial Committee had in turn received a notification from Mr. Porter that the judicial complaint was being withdrawn. And there was a lot of other things in that email about, what could have been done differently, what needs to happen to move forward. But ultimately, it seems like the theme was the treasurer's resigned and we got it filed and we need to move forward and find a new treasurer. That was more or less how I read that email. And then we'll point out that it was on October 9th that I was appointed treasurer at the in-person meeting. Mr. Connor did not attend that meeting. It was held in Des Moines. And 1 week later, it was Mr. Howe who, as former chair, still had access to a Google voicemail account. He listened to that account and found a recording, or maybe multiple recordings, from the Kirkwood Hotel saying that, please get in touch with me, Mr. Connor, that because we never got paid for the April convention that had occurred in 2021. So Mr. Howe quickly followed up with them, requested emails, requested receipts to ensure that this was legitimate. And it just so happened that we had a scheduled meeting 2 days later on the 17th, because on the 9th, we decided we have a lot to do. We just appointed a new treasurer. We need to plan a state convention. Let's start meeting weekly. So luckily enough, we had an SEC meeting scheduled for that Sunday night. And it was in that meeting, as we'll see, that Michael Connor Jr. was recommended to be removed by the Judicial Committee because he did not attend that meeting where we expected him to, hey, what's going on? Why was this not paid? There's some kind of mistake going on. He didn't attend. And so we felt like, well, we need to remove him. And as we removed him, pretty much simultaneously, we received an email saying that he also resigned as chair. And it was in that meeting that we then also appointed a new secretary, given that Logan had resigned the same morning that Mr. Howe reported the initial Kirkwood thing. So again, we'll double click into more of this in the next few slides. But I do want to say that, when we go through our retrospective, we're going to talk about, ultimately it looks like we're dealing with, let's say, a bad actor, right? And then we're also dealing with people that, let's say, didn't live up to their duties based on the leadership positions they assumed within the SEC. And then there's also the question of like, well, how can we do things differently in the future? And so one thing I want to make sure we kind of speak to is, again, speaking to that piece of it, but also just the timeline of events. So we're kind of knowing like who handed things off to who, and as well as like, how can we even be sure of what we're checking, right? So this Wells Fargo bank account has not existed for years and years. It was actually just opened in 2017 when Sarah Mitchell was the LPIA treasurer. In 2018, there was actually 3 ethics reports that were failed to be filed in a timely manner, resulting in penalties. And that's when, again, kind of what I've been told is that it was Myra, it was Mr. Howe. I'm sorry, Myra, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Otherwise, I would have said Mrs.
It's fine. It's Matika, but you can say it however you want to.
So Mrs. Matika and Mr. Howe were kind of then like kind of picking up the pieces there and working to file those reports. on behalf of the absentee treasurer. And then it was actually Mr. Porter who kind of stepped up, in my understanding, to also then help the party through this time and served as the treasurer until the February 2020 convention, when Michael Connor Jr. was elected chair and Amy Wickstead was elected as treasurer, respectively. And again, these are just some of those same dates we saw, that there was multiple reports that were filed during that time after they were appointed. And only then on August 7th was Michael Connor Jr. added to the Wells Fargo bank account. I do not yet have the document from Wells Fargo on when Amy was added. So I'm waiting on that piece. That's been requested via, we had a fax to a specific department in Wells Fargo. They needed a fax, yeah. So we're still waiting on that piece as well. But for the next piece, let's talk about the judicial complaint. So again, it was Mr. Porter, or actually it was on July 19th was the due date for the January 1 to January 30th ethics report that was missed. And then it was on August 11th that Mr. Porter filed the judicial complaint saying more or less like, hey, we missed an ethics report. What's going on? This is not acceptable, right? We kind of went down that road in the past, a few years earlier, like we need to be on top of this, right? And then it was just 2 days later that Amy Wickstead resigned as treasurer. On the 15th, Mr. Gordon Stewart volunteered to help with the ethics report. And on August 22nd, Michael Connor Jr. filed that ethics report listing Gordon Stewart as the treasurer. But we'll just point out that Mr. Stewart was never appointed as treasurer by the SEC. And according to Mr. Stewart, he never even got access to anything. He really wasn't able to support this at all. And then September 7th, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Howe emailed the SEC that Jake Porter had withdrawn the judicial complaint, kind of saying, hey, the treasurer resigned, we got the thing filed, but we got a lot of work to do. Communications breaking down, et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of takes us, guys, to the time that I kind of got involved. And maybe I'll just pause for a moment to say, as a fresh pair of eyes or an outsider, what I it sounded like what was going on to me was that I thought, oh, it's this perfect storm of events. You have COVID, so a lot of in-person meetings had stopped happening. Now they're just on Facebook, or maybe there's a Zoom meeting, but that normal momentum of in-person meetings had kind of stopped for a year and a half. And it seemed like there was just the charitable explanation I had at the time, because I was actually raising concerns to anyone I could find, that as a new member of the Iowa Party, I was like, there's no events posted on the website. I emailed, I became a lifetime member. No one responded back to me. I can't even find out if there's anything active because I'm not on Facebook. So I had a lot of concerns about just basic like website stuff. And it just seemed like, well, there was someone who stood up to become the new chair. Maybe he was an inexperienced leader, but he had all these health issues, as everyone was saying. And so he's just been focusing on his health. So other folks kind of following the lead or lack thereof of the leader, it just seemed like that was kind of the explanation for why things are moving really slow. Like, what do we mean? We don't have the state convention planned yet. Like, that's seemed to be the story as I understood it, talking to folks as I was introducing myself to Mr. Porter, who lives in Council Bluffs, where I'm at as well. And that's kind of what it seemed to be the theme, is people weren't happy with the state of the party, but there was a charitable explanation that kind of made sense. So that's kind of as I entered the picture then, and became, again, I said, hey, I've been a treasurer for a PAC in the past. I know how to file a report on time and check deposits versus expenditures and make the numbers match. Seemed pretty straightforward. I thought it was something I could do to help. So I became treasurer on the 9th, and it was on the 15th, again, a week later, that Mr. Howe sends the email showing us like, hey, what is going on with this email from Kirkwood Hotel, saying that we owe $4,000 that we never, they tried to charge the credit card and never got back to them. And even then, guys, like, again, from my perspective, part of my complaint with the chair or the SEC in general was like, I send an email, and no one ever gets back to me. Like, so it's kind of like, wow, if Mr. Connor wasn't responding to members who were reaching out to ask how they could get involved, maybe he's also being negligent with checking the voicemail. Maybe there's a charitable but like negligent explanation for what was going on. So that same morning, Mr. Connor's wife, Logan, resigned as secretary. And again, Joseph Howe sent the email saying like, hey, something's going on here. So we had the meeting scheduled. So this would be 36 hours later, Sunday night, we had the SEC meeting scheduled. We were supposed to talk about state convention stuff. But instead, we said, okay, table that. Michael Connor Jr., please attend this meeting. We need to understand what's going on. We need to move forward. Is this really, do we really owe this money? How did this happen? Why is it not reflected on the ethics report? This doesn't make sense. And he failed to show up. And then at that point, the SEC and the Judicial Committee made a recommendation to say, well, how can we move forward? Because we were in the very unfortunate position that he was the only one that we knew of that was on the bank account. How can we, find out what's going on if he's not going to show up to this meeting, right? And so the Judicial Committee, they recommended that the SEC ask the Judicial Committee to remove him for, at the minimum, like negligence, that we're reporting that we paid them, but apparently we didn't. And so he was removed this chair. And as we mentioned, within a few minutes, we got an email saying that he had resigned as well. So within that meeting on October 17th, we said he's removed. We voted to have the co-chair, Mr. Ed Wright, become the acting chair. We also appointed Mr. Clyde Gibson as secretary. He volunteered to become to serve on the SEC as secretary, replacing Logan Connor. And we kind of said, okay, guys, how are we going to move forward? What do we have to do? And as treasurer, I said, well, let me contact Wells Fargo and try to figure out what kind of documentation will we need to forcibly remove a signatory from an account, assuming that he's not going to be helpful in this endeavor, right? Because I had been emailing him earlier in the week saying, hey, I'm the new treasurer. Let's talk about getting me access to the Wells Fargo bank account, right? Let's start moving forward. And he wasn't responding to my emails. So we kind of said, he didn't show up to this meeting, though he said he would. What are we going to do next? So I called the bank account or the bank, talked to a business banker. And as I started chatting with him about what kind of documentation will you need for us to be able to forcibly remove this person and add the new people. And it's like signed and documented meeting minutes with the letterhead. We're talking about that stuff. And I give him the account number and he's like, Nathan, this account looks highly unusual. Do you expect to see charges to Nintendo on this bank account? Do you expect to see charges to Hy-Vee and Casey's gas station? This does not look like a business account. Are you sure you gave me the right account number? And it's like, oh no, right? So that was when we had not yet seized control of the bank account, but we very much began like kind of a crisis management plan to say, here's what we need to do as quickly as possible. I think it was actually Mr. Green that kind of thought about it and said, maybe Amy Wixted is on the account. Or we confirmed she was actually in that phone call. I confirmed that she was on the account. Mr. Green reached out to her and she said, oh no. And her and Ed met then in Des Moines the next day on the 19th. Amy was able to remove, or they were able to add Ed and withdraw all the money that was left. And at the time, we said, hey, according to the last filing statement, there should be about $8,000. And we look in there and there's about exactly $4,100, which ironically was what we owe or did owe. We've since paid Kirkwood, but we owed Kirkwood $4,100. So it was about that. That's kind of what we saw. But then by the time they met on the 19th, then it was like the end of the day. It was like 4:45. They were closing at 5. They're trying to get them out of there. So all they really had time to do was withdraw the money, put it into a cashier's check. And then it was the next day that we were able to kind of organize myself in Omaha, Nebraska, Ed and Amy in Des Moines, organizing across the different branches. Okay, like how do we add people and remove people in the right way with the right documentation? So let's print out the email from Mike that he resigned, et cetera, et cetera. So ultimately, it was then on the 19th, on that Wednesday, or I'm sorry, that Tuesday, that we were able to remove Mike from the bank account. At that point, at least we had some paper statements going back through 2021. Unfortunately, the way the bank executed the series of events, they weren't able to add me, even though I signed and then faxed the thing over there, because they removed Amy before she had the power to add me. They did it in the wrong order. So then we had to put in like a manual thing in place with Ed that ended up taking 10 business days to get me added as well. But at least at that point, between the 21st and the 22nd, we were able to get the paper statements to our legal counsel, Jules, and she began the analysis of looking at all the transactions and then comparing them to the ethics reports and kind of highlighting which ones are questionable, which ones might be legitimate, which ones are very likely illegitimate or unauthorized, and kind of starting to get that ball in motion. And it was at that point that it was also the recommendation from legal counsel, from Jules, that we should not be discussing these preliminary findings, because at the end of the day, it's like, well, who had access to the bank account? A lot of these charges happened in Knoxville, so that might be presumptive to say, well, who lived in Knoxville, aka the chair. But what evidence do we really have that of what can we really say for sure? Again, how many debit cards were there? Who was on the account, etc. That stuff still needed to be fleshed out at that time. And again, we were still gathering information, right? It was between the 24th and the 29th that a press release was drafted, kind of debated. There was kind of different versions floating around, and the one was ultimately approved and posted on the 29th. On the 30th, legal counsel confirmed, was meeting with different DAs and confirmed appropriate jurisdiction, and was given kind of a verbal statement that, yes, if you give us this information, we will prosecute. And so then on the 31st, the SEC met, and there was a unanimous vote to report the evidence to the appropriate authorities. And I'm almost done with this part, guys, and then we'll get to the evidence piece. But just to kind of close out for November then, on November 4th, I was added to the bank account, and I had finally full access to the full digital statements. At that point on the 5th, our legal counsel, Jules, phoned with authorities, because now they said, okay, now we have to have an in-person meeting to hand deliver the evidence we'd collected. I completed an analysis of the unauthorized transactions going back to 2020, finding out that the first unauthorized transaction was there middle of August. So it started, again, about 2 weeks after Mr. Connor was added to the account. It was on that 9th as well, but then with that full view of the analysis, which took us to just over $10,000 of unauthorized transactions, I met with the Iowa Ethics Board, reported the transactions, and pretty much chatted with them on what's going to be the procedure to file these amended reports. I'm actually going to be meeting with the gentleman from the Ethics Board on Tuesday. He was out last week on vacation to formally amend the reports. And we also went ahead and filed a waiver petition for that $200 penalty. We've been led to believe that they're very likely to waive that penalty given the situation we're in. On November 9th, legal counsel met with those relevant authorities, provided the evidence, and the case is officially opened and being investigated by the appropriate officers. And again, it is an ongoing investigation. They're still requesting more information from us, and we're happy to comply. On the 14th, we had another SEC meeting, and I reported, I gave a treasurer report that we're proposing to use as the format for treasurer reports moving forward. It sounds like it's been quite a while since a treasurer report was given in an SEC meeting. And this report is very transparent in terms of, what during this period of time, what were the deposits, what were the withdrawals, and then here's the links to a Google Drive that the SEC has access to. And actually everyone in the party can have access, but the folders are structured in a way that there's some folders that only SEC has access to. And we're saying, hey, that'll be a great trust but verify method going forward, that the source materials of that treasury report, the banking statements, the receipts, we load them into that report. And that way everyone can go verify the treasury report that's on the SEC without needing to add everyone to a bank account, right? And then this 14th meeting, there was another unanimous vote on the press release that was released the next day, that also alerted everyone to this very public meeting that we're having now. And again, I want to get to the Q&A. And I told you guys I'd be monitoring this. How did Mike get added to the Wells Fargo account? He was added when he was the treasurer. Or, I'm sorry, he was the chair. So it was totally appropriate for him to be added to the account. So again, he was appointed chair in February. It wasn't until August 7th that he was added to the Wells Fargo account. Normally, you do expect the chair and the treasurer to be at least the two minimum people on a checking account. Was any reason given for Mrs. Wixton's abrupt departure? I wasn't actually on those emails, but you know, what I assumed at the time was like embarrassment that a report was filed late. But it sounds like there was more of a story around she was frustrated that she wasn't getting the right level of access to do the job she was supposed to do, and that's another, I think, factor that came onto it. The crisis management plan. Yeah, the crisis management plan was something that I drafted, and I did reach out to, because that is actually very timely. I went to the Region 6 training hosted by the LP National just 2 months earlier, and we talked about how to create a crisis management plan and a communications plan and how to draft a press release. So these are all things that were top of mind that I did not intend to have to put into practice just a month or two later. But we did reach out to Kara Schultz, to Tyler Harris, and kind of consulted with them and said, hey, here's what's going on. We'd love, your pair of eyes on this as well. But mainly the crisis management plan was, for the most part, like, how do we stop the bleeding? How do we stop the transactions? How do we gain access to the bank account? And now that we're doing this, who's on point to figure out jurisdiction, to do the analysis, to, like, what do we think the ideal press release would look like, and what would have to happen in order to make that come true? Those are the types of things that were on that plan. Was this vote a public vote? Well, so Jake, we'll make sure that you can speak to more of these questions if I'm not answering them sufficiently when we go to just the public Q&A part. Did we inform the State Ethics Board before stakeholders? No. So yeah, I didn't feel like I wanted to inform the Ethics Board until we had the analysis that we felt we were confident with, because there was a couple of rounds of auditing where I looked at what our legal counsel did, and I kind of double checked that work. Same thing on what I put together. So it wasn't until I kind of thought, well, once we give the evidence to the authorities, and then I was like, that to me is when it made sense to say, hey, Ethics Board. And maybe that was a bad move on my part, but that's just kind of that was my judgment call of, as treasurer, when should I alert them that there's discrepancies, let's say, in the ethics reports. And they've been very easy to work with. I mean, in fact, they're not going to make me go back and record hundreds and hundreds of unauthorized transactions. They're going to allow me to do like a lump sum and saying, here's the lump sum of unauthorized transactions, and then just move forward, rather than spending hours and hours of my time reporting every $4 charge to the gas station. What kind of treasury reports, bank balances, etc., were given to the committee before you? I'm not sure. It sounds like really there haven't been treasury reports given in any kind of consistent way, but that's speculation on my part. Was access to Stripe and adult donation. So this is one of the key things. When we removed Mike Connor, that deactivated his debit card. So that's when we saw a lot of the things that were coming through. Someone's HBO subscription, Amazon Prime subscription, Hulu was all on there. So all those unauthorized transactions stopped once we removed the debit card. But that way we didn't break our connection to Stripe and Anadot. So our donations continue to flow in, but the unauthorized transactions stopped. So, and did the board provide any guidance on reporting to the ethics board? Okay, cool. So let me get to then this piece. So yeah, this is just a view of after we did like kind of the line by line and typed all the unauthorized transactions into a spreadsheet. We saw, month by month this view, and we'll just say that, it looks like the trend line was continuing to increase. And the only reason it goes down here in October is because, again, Mr. Connor was removed there in October. That kind of stopped that trend line. Have the newly appointed treasurer and secretary appointed the suggested deputies? I'm very glad Jocelyn asked that question. I'm going to get to that in the retrospective. Okay, so I include this, guys, just because to me it's kind of interesting. So when I was looking at unauthorized transactions, and we looked at the timeline earlier, and we said, okay, there was reports that were filed in 2020 and May and July, and then in October, and the unauthorized transaction stopped in August. So what I expected to find with just a very superficial overview of what was the Wells Fargo balance on a particular date, and what did we report to the ethics board on that same date. What I expected to see was in May and July, it matched dollar for dollar. That's kind of the expectations I held myself to when I was a treasurer for a PAC, right? Like, of course, you wanted to make sure everything matches. But then I expected to see that what we reported would have been more than what was left to account for the unauthorized transactions. That's what I kind of, again, expected to see in the ethics reports. So I was a little bit, and again, then I learned a bit more about the history of the issues we had with 2 treasurers ago when that person left. But the other thing that I found interesting is, if you look at, again, these dates reflect the ending date for a reporting period, right? So as an example, 7/14/2020, we're supposed to report what is our cash balance on hand on that date. And actually, we've consistently, since the Wells Fargo account has been opened, we've been reporting to the ethics board far less than what is actually in the bank account. Generally around an average of like $2,000 less. So as an example, let's say in 2018 here, let's say we reported around 2,500 to the ethics board, but we actually had about 5,000 in the Wells Fargo account. So I'm not sure what the explanation is, and things in red shows that there were penalties imposed during probably for late fees. But I mean, ironically, again, it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't that, from the moment the unauthorized transactions began, again in August of 2020, I would have expected 10/14 to show to that we reported more than what we really had, similar on 12/31. The reality is we were actually more catching up. Like the last report that was filed by Mr. Connor was actually the most accurate of any report in the last 3 years, because it's only $200 off. Where historically, again, if I'm just looking at what was the balance in Wells Fargo and what did we report was the balance, it was normally more like $2,000 off. So I'm not sure what to make of this. But this is the last slide, guys, and then we'll open it up for more questions. But I did kind of want to think through like some bit of a retrospective, right? And kind of what were some of the key issues and challenges, because obviously don't appoint someone to the SEC that's capable of this level of betrayal is a good one, but how do you make that actionable and move forward with it in a positive way, right? So these are more things that, like, hey, at least we know what we can do about these particular issues, right? So as an example, treasury report should be timely, consistent, transparent, and auditable by the SEC. If the SEC had been demanding a consistent, transparent, auditable treasury report every SEC meeting, and oh, by the way, there's supposed to be 4 mandatory meetings per year, maybe this wouldn't have happened, right? And so again, my first treasury report that was provided to the SEC on November 14th, I think is a solid template that talks about what was the balance at the beginning date, what's the balance now, what was the sum total of deposits and withdrawals, here's the table of those particular ones, here's notes to explain any discrepancies, and then here's the link to go view the raw documents. I feel like that's an appropriate way, or at least it's something that we can start iterating on to move forward. SEC member resignation should be replaced as a top priority. Again, Amy Wickstead resigned August 13th. I wasn't appointed until October 9th. Almost 2 months had passed, right? So there is a consideration by the folks on the bylaws committee. Maybe we should have language to put a time period and say, hey, within 30 days, if an SEC member resigns, you need to replace them. And again, just at least giving more teeth to people that would try to make it a priority, right? Well, where obviously it should be. Another one, SEC members should be active and engaged in the party. Meaning, again, are people aware that that there should be a treasury report? Are they aware that are people like that are on the SEC active and engaged? And what I would say is, I believe there's a current bylaw that just hasn't been followed, and maybe again it's that perfect storm of COVID and the chair telling us that he was hospitalized. So then there's this with this, and maybe that's true, and maybe that's probably is true, but that gives again that sympathy and that, oh, you know, this is a tough time, he's got to deal with personal stuff, etc. So it allowed things to slip again from out looking at, you know, fresh pair of eyes perspective. That's kind of seen what it looked like was happening in terms of, was the SEC not meeting regularly enough? But again, per bylaw 2 section 1, it says that if an SEC member misses 2 of the mandatory meetings in a year, that signals their resignation from the SEC, and they're no longer considered active. And it feels like for certain members, people should have been replaced long ago, because the first meeting I attended, we had trouble just getting quorum because of the people that just hadn't been attending, right? And I think this is a big one here, and this gets to the question that Jocelyn asked. SEC member replacements should have proper knowledge transfer. So what I would say is that current bylaws have not been followed, meaning bylaw 2 section 6. I mean, again, it's not a mandate, it's a suggestion, but it suggests, encourages, I think encourages is the word, that SEC members are encouraged to appoint an alternate or deputy. So again, that's the idea, is maybe don't wait until someone's elected to then do a knowledge transfer. Be grooming someone for your replacement, right? And that way, that's kind of the pitch for why should they be nominated and selected. Hey, I've been the deputy for the last year. I know how to do the job. I'll continue to do it with the new job, right? So, so trying to, from my perspective, I'm trying to again show that we're positively moving in that direction. That I have selected a deputy treasurer that I feel is very competent, has solid libertarian credentials, and is known by many people in the party. And this person has agreed to serve as the deputy treasurer. And even though the bylaws don't say that the SEC needs to approve the deputy, I'm going to take it to a vote, just to, because one of the things we did as well was talked about, should we have more vetting questions for anyone added to the SEC and that type of thing. So we'll go ahead and do that on the 28th. But I strongly believe that anyone taking a leadership position in the SEC, it's like, this is actually in the training that Region 6 talked about, is don't make yourself irreplaceable. Have a deputy, groom your replacement, and know that if you get hit by a bus or win a lottery ticket, the party will be fine. And with that, guys, I can I'll try to quickly respond to some of these in the chat, and then let's just consider it open Q&A, and I can go back to any of the slides I had. But I do see, were exit interviews of the 3 officers that resigned done? No, I mean, they weren't responding to any request to join meetings, let alone an exit interview. And they're not written reports where accountability existed. So how about this? I'm going to stop. I just talked for a bunch, and again, most of you guys have never seen me before. So why don't I stop talking for a bit? Jules, were there any questions that you feel like you want to hit on that came from the chat?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. So Joe asked, about the accountability of the other SEC members. So the problem is that it appeared that the SEC was following the previously established procedure, where a treasurer gives the report, the chair approves it, and no one questions this. That was a problem, right? And when Joe and I were on SEC, when Keith Lau was on SEC, this was not a problem because we appeared to be trustworthy individuals and didn't steal any money from anybody. In this particular situation, the procedure that was previously established was followed. And no one had any reason to suspect there was any wrongdoing until we heard about Kirkwood Hotel not being paid. So as far as the rest of the SEC accountability, most certainly no criminal accountability is there. possibly there is a civil accountability, but I have not looked into it yet because, again, everybody will rely on the fact that the previous procedure was followed. As far as Amy Wickstead accountability is concerned, I do not know. I have yet to determine, and the authorities have yet to determine whether there is any criminal accountability or not. I know that I've reported all of the details of when she resigned, how long the theft has been occurring, or the unauthorized transactions have been occurring, how many times the ethics report has been filed while she was still a treasurer. All of that was reported to the authorities. Whether they will find her criminally liable or not, I do not know. I have yet to evaluate whether she's civilly liable. What I think everybody needs to understand is, there has been a lot of blame on social media that we are hiding things and so on and so forth. Please understand that we are in the middle of a very, very delicate balancing act of figuring out what's going on, making sure our members are aware of what's going on, and at the same time, making sure that the proper authorities are notified and we have justice. It's a balancing act. It's not a hiding act. We have to make sure that we get justice. At the very least, we have to attempt to recover some of that money, whether it's criminally or civilly. We will attempt to do both. Right now, criminally, we are waiting for the results for the criminal investigation and for the criminal charges to be filed. And once that's done, we will reevaluate and see what we can do civilly. But this is not a hiding act. This is a balancing act to make sure that we do not interfere with investigation. As far as there was another question that Joe asked as a follow-up. Joe, help me out here. As a follow-up, Job, what level of fiduciary accountability did Amy have?
Yeah, that kind of tied.
And I personally think that Amy is civilly liable because Amy did have fiduciary accountability, fiduciary duty to make sure that the reports are properly filed, that the treasurer report is provided properly. It was her duty. From what I understand, she did not do it, and it was Mike Connor who did that. Can we pursue her civilly? Possibly. Will we recover anything from her? That's the evaluation that we need to make. Is she actually somebody that we can recover any money from? Because civilly, you can go and sue anybody else and get a piece of paper that is a judgment, but what is the benefit of that? If we can't recover from the person financially, what is the purpose of suing them? If it's just for the piece of paper and then the party makes the decision that that is what we need to do, then we're going to proceed with that. But at the end of the day, it's not the member's decision. Unfortunately, it is the SEC's decision whether they want me to go and pursue the civil case against Amy for breach of fiduciary duty. Did I'm putting glasses back on. Give me 1 second.
Rose, can you please mute your phone?
I'm sorry, I thought it was muted.
It might be the other person who's on a phone. It's one of the two phone people.
Joe, you're saying that as a follow-up, were reports ever given per Nathan's statement? What do you mean by that?
Sure, I'll elaborate. It's my understanding that Amy did not do the treasurer's report at the 2021 convention, and Nathan alluded to the fact that the committee had not been given detailed and regular reports throughout Amy's term. And I didn't know, and Jules, I know you weren't on probably those central committee meetings. I wasn't either. I didn't know if maybe a member from that time would have any details on the level of details, if they're regular, and that would be my question.
I don't think there were any reports, any details provided. And the way we are addressing it, or the way I personally advise the committee, and it seems like the committee is on board with following that advice, is that going forward, that it's not just going to be a treasurer's report, it's going to be a treasurer's report substantiated by the bank statements. Unfortunately, we're in the position that we have never had to do this before, but right now we have to. So whoever is the treasurer, whether it's Nathan going forward or somebody else, when the treasurer's report is provided to a SEC committee, it has to be substantiated by the bank statements. Those bank statements should not be public. They will be provided in the Google Drive or whatever the access the SEC has. They should not be part of the meeting, but they should be provided to SEC members for the double check. Right now, we cannot hold the rest of the SEC accountable because they were following the procedure. Going forward, if we are providing the bank statements and we still have ethics reports filed that are not accurate, if we still have unauthorized transactions and the SEC closes their eyes, that's when we can hold them accountable. Does that respond to your question, Joe?
I do have one more follow-up. To clarify for me and perhaps the other listeners, it's been said that they follow procedure, but from what I've heard from Nathan and in the prior central committee call, that the group did not receive financial reports regularly. So that seems outside of procedure and outside of the bylaws. And again, I know you weren't on those calls. I wasn't. I didn't know if anyone can elaborate on what they actually received over the last year and a half.
But so, and I understand that. I understand your question. So let's go back to when you and I were on SEC. We were given treasurer's report by a treasurer, and we didn't question it, right? Those reports were not substantiated by anything other than her pulling numbers out of the thin air, as we unfortunately found out later. And I can tell you that looking back, and hindsight 2020 is amazing. We should have established the procedures where everybody provides the treasurer provides the bank statements to the rest of the SEC. You and I and the rest of the SEC, when we were officers, did not do that. We had treasurer's report on a regular basis. We approved them and moved on. What is the difference between having the treasurer's reports that are made out of thin air versus not having treasurer's reports on the regular basis in the last year and a half?
I would agree that I just don't know if they even received one. I know at the time as well, 3 of the 4 officers had bank account access, so we could substantiate that. So again, that's neither here nor there on what the current committee did. Sorry, I got a yelling kid in the background. But I just don't know that I believe that they received any reports. And I know they didn't have one at convention either.
So what I think we need to focus on, and that's personal opinion and a professional opinion. We need to focus on 2 things. First, how do we get justice and how do we possibly recover some of that money? And that is happening with criminal charges. And once the criminal charges are filed, we will pursue the civil action, or so I understand the SEC wants us to do. And second is, how do we avoid this happening again? And the first step, as I brought it up before, we're going to be providing bank statements to all the SEC members. So that we are going to make sure that the ethics reports is not just on a treasurer responsibility, that it is on the agenda on a regular basis, and the ethics reports are filed and the ethics reports are accurate. And we are going to hold every single SEC member accountable for making sure that those reports are filed properly. We can speculate about what could have, should have, would have we done to make this different. We cannot change what has happened.
We can try to attempt to recover what occurred. We can attempt to recover the money that was very, very hard earned by the previous committee, by the members, and we can make sure that we put precautions to not, for this to not happen again. We cannot change the past. We can learn from it and use it as a lesson, and use it as something that, okay, this is what we can do. At this point in time, the only person accountable that I can see criminally is Mike Connor. And that is the person who is reported. If 2 weeks from now, the police department calls me and says, no, we think that Amy Wickstead was personally liable as well, and we're gonna prosecute her, I will not stand on the way. I will report to SCC that this is the problem. This is what the police department, this is what the authorities think they're going to do. This is what the prosecutor is going to do. And every single person, I guarantee you, is going to be on board. But right now, the actual unauthorized transactions occurred only at the hands of Mike Connor. So he personally should be liable, held liable criminally. Civilly, Amy Wickstead, possibly. The rest of the SEC, I don't see the responsibility. I don't see a breach of fiduciary duty because we did not put the precautions in 2020. Does that answer your questions, Joe?
Sorry, as I mute. Mostly, I think the outstanding one is whether or not the committee received reports. I understand where you're going.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, and I can follow up with one of the members. Thank you, Jules.
But the problem is, Joe, that even if they didn't receive the reports, we still can't hold them liable personally.
No, I'm not saying that they should be sued or anything. Although
That is something that needs to be that needs to be looked forward to and fixed. That is something that has to be on the agenda every single month. And if it's not met as a requirement, then it needs to be raised by the rest of the SEC as a problem. But as of right now, whether they received it or not, yeah, it would be nice to know. But if they didn't receive it, we can't hold them liable, not legally. We can be mad at them.
Yeah.
We can be frustrated at them. We can be hateful about it, but it's not going to help us legally.
That it wasn't related to a civil suit for the group, because I've been told by members that they didn't see this coming, and it seems like there was no. If there wasn't regular reports, that's a big red flag to me. So, but that concludes my question. Like I said, I can follow up with the member at the time and see if they got it or not, but it wouldn't make a difference at this point. So, thank you, Jules.
Sure.
There's a few more questions I see here. One from Mr. Porter asking, was there any evidence that they're like floating loans? Taking the money like, oh, I'll put it back, and then maybe it spiraled out of control. I don't think so. From the beginning, it was just stuff like buying stuff and then getting $10 cash back. This was like death by 1,000 cuts, like literally 1,000 charges for $20 here, $60 there, Hulu and HBO subscriptions. So no, I don't. It doesn't look to me like, oh, I'll pay it back later type of thing. Now, to be fair, I haven't gone through the Stripe donations of who are the individual people. That's what I'll be doing when I prepare the January 1 treasury report, obviously, or ethics report. But it doesn't look like that was the intent. I saw some other ones. Was there an audit committee? I won't be able to answer that one about an audit committee. Yeah, this thing about the CPA, should we have a CPA? I mean, I just say, like, one, the treasurer is one of the 4 officers of the SEC. The treasurer is on the bank statement. The treasurer has the ability to have a debit card and pay bills and deposit checks, right? So the idea of like, what is a CPA going to do, and what is a CPA going to cost? I hope that makes it kind of clear. Like in my experience, most organizations, the treasurer is a member of the party, and again, I was the treasurer for many years. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't a particularly hard thing to do. It was just every once in a while you have to go into, the bank accounts, get out your Excel sheet, figure out who you need to report because they went over some, $100 maximum that crosses a reporting threshold. Make sure your expenses minus your debits match from one balance to the next, and file a report. And in this case, also create those similar types of reports for the meetings. But the treasurer, again, is one of the four, top officers of chair, co-chair, secretary, and treasurer. So, and so the question on why is no member of this elected SEC available for questions? So some of them are here, but due to like what we're talking about, this it kind of made sense for me to present the findings because I'm the new treasurer and I've been doing a lot of the analysis with Jules in terms of if we're here to talk about what happened, why, and again a bit on the retrospective piece. I'm happy to chat more about what are ideas from the group, because what I totally say from a perspective of moving forward in a positive way would be, well, hey, there are ideas that we've been floating around internally within the SEC rather on, well, are there changes to bylaws that would have stopped this? I'm somewhat in the position where I think, well, if what the bylaws already said weren't necessarily being followed in terms of removing people that don't attend two meetings, in terms of appointing delegates and alternates, then why would additional rules have made any difference, right? But certainly, I feel like in this type of situation, we are going to look to say, as Jules was saying earlier, maybe were some people criminally liable or some people civilly liable, and if some people would just say, well, what could I have done differently if I would have spoken up when I saw that red flag, or pushed someone to say, no, it is important that we have a treasury report. Why don't we have it? So, and I've certainly, as someone who just gave my life member donation and then saw that it was spent in the way it was spent, I've certainly been pretty angry at times. But I also think too, when I first came in, and to me, this perfect storm of events where this person who was clearly not trustworthy was playing on people's emotions, talking about, oh, in the hospital again, sorry, I can't make this meeting, I got pulled back into the hospital. So to me, that's what it looks like, is this person really manipulated people. And then again, people maybe could have handled it differently, but that's not the way it went. So any other questions or people that just want to speak? And I've kind of given I've done a lot of talking. So if anyone had, even if it's not a question, if you kind of feel like you want to say something, I'm happy to stay and hear, and because I'm also very interested in jotting down solutions and things that we can, again, propose for bylaws or standard operating procedures that we should put in place. So what are the thoughts from the group?
Hey, Nathan, I asked a question a while back. So as you went through your slide, I know we're focused on a very specific thing that's happened recently and such, but you mentioned that filing incorrect ethics reports has been going on for quite a while. And I'm sorry, but there are a lot of people who are talking a lot of garbage out there. And then I see this.
Well, Ben,
I'm a little upset about this. As someone who's been a donating member for the party for a number of years, and this is the first I've heard of any kind of issues we've had that has been going on since 2018.
let me just be real clear, like what this is meant to say and what it's not meant to say. There could be a reasonable explanation to say that maybe per the laws of your state, maybe when you commit to a transaction, but you haven't paid the vendor yet, you'll still mark it on one side of the balance sheet, but the cash balance like won't truly match what's there on the day. But to me, that would explain like a one-off type of event. But yeah, what I just did is I looked at every statement and compared it to all the ethics reports going back to 2017 when the Wells Fargo was opened. And I just said, well, what did we report was the cash balance at the end of the period? And what was it on that same date? So if the reporting period ended on October 14th, I would look not on October 30th, but on October 14th, what was that amount? Because a lot of these were amended reports too. So again, I don't know what to think about this.
You mentioned that the Wells Fargo account was just opened recently, like within the
in
last couple of years.
2017. Yeah, in
20
2017 is when it was opened. Yeah.
What prompted that change from what we were banking before to this? I mean, it sounds like who's this Sarah that Carl just mentioned in the chat?
Ben, this is Joe Howe. I can maybe speak to a little bit of that. So Sarah Mitchell was the treasurer. I can't recall if she's elected in 2017 or the term before I was on the Central Committee. So she had not filed for 3 terms. And when we asked her about it, as the deadline was coming up for the 3rd one, she stated she had filed and there must have been an issue and she's preparing the information for the next filing. Shortly after that, we received notice from the Iowa Ethics Board that we were delinquent with those ethics filings. So the Central Committee at the time removed her. We would have had public posts on that, both on social media and website.
Where? Please show me one, because I'm sorry, I don't see any of them. And as someone who's been donating since I just went back and checked my Answer, which by the way, apparently was the only person donating Answer that Amy Wick said, let me know. I don't remember ever getting a notice that there was an issue like that.
Yep, if you'd like, now I've tried looking back on the blog on LPIA.org, and it only goes back a few months, well, not a few months, maybe a year and a half. So there should be a post within that. And there would have been a post on social media. This would have been way back, gosh, December of 2018, I think.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Joe, but I'm hearing a lot of garbage from a lot of people about this wasn't communicated. And I just went back and checked my donations started in July of 17 is when I started. I know that's not the longest term ever about people not being notified, but I don't remember ever being told about this. And so, I'm just kind of frustrated by a lot of stuff.
You're talking about the penalties that were imposed in the 2018 period. Is that what you're saying?
Apparently. I mean, we didn't file it. We filed incorrectly. And then sorry, I'm just.
No, I understand your frustration. We did announce it publicly. We did work with the Iowa Ethics Board to reduce the fine from 800 to 100 because I had a pretty good relationship with them. So again, we would have removed her, and Jake would have been voted on that winter of 2019.
Mr. Davis, you mentioned don't forget the in-kind donations. So this analysis here wasn't based on did the donations minus the expenditures match, but there's a separate line item for what is the balance of cash on hand, and that's what I compared this to. So, all right. Anyone else that wants to say a few words or ask a question or?
Nathan, this is Jake. First of all, thanks so much for doing this wonderful presentation and stepping up at this time. I greatly appreciate the work you've done here in Pot County. I want to go back to something that Jules had mentioned, that the board was not trying to lie. They were not trying to cover it up. I hate to disagree. That's exactly what this looks like. You put out press releases, not you personally, but the board put out press releases that didn't go out to press. Why not call them a blog post? They were posted on social media at midnight. People had been complaining. You guys have covered this up constantly, and I'm tired of it. You guys have defamed me. You've had members defame me, and I'm sick of it. I am absolutely sick at the behavior of this board.
Okay. Well,
And we
So
got to
that-
hear all this BS about don't defame a criminal, don't defame a criminal. Complete garbage.
yeah, I'm not on Facebook, so I'm not even truly familiar with kind of exactly what you're talking about. But you
I'd
know.
like to respond to the defaming the criminal part. I do not know what Jake is referring as Jake being defamed. I was not involved in that. That was not.
You
brought
liked
up.
the post, Jules. You liked the post. You saw it by Shaden. You liked it.
I don't remember what you're talking about.
Yes, you did. You said shame on you, Jake, and Shaden responded, you saw it.
I do not understand what you're talking about. I
Yes,
do
you
know
do. You
that
understand damn well what I'm talking about, Jules.
Okay.
And you and Ed owe me an
Hey,
apology.
Jake. Hey, Jake. I have a 60-hour job where I run my business. I'm responsible for 6 full-time people and about 100 clients. On top of that, I have a family. So if I liked a post from 3, 4, 5 weeks ago, I apologize for not remembering what it is that I liked. Okay? What I can tell you is the issue. There were several messages that were sent by Jocelyn that were not factually accurate. They were a little bit factually accurate and a little bit factually inaccurate. And when we are dealing with somebody who is intentionally stealing or appears to be intentionally stealing almost $10,000 from the party, that person is not going to hesitate to file a defamation lawsuit against the party. That was my statement as to cut it out, stop talking about anything that is possibly factually inaccurate, because we cannot afford a defamation lawsuit by somebody who possibly stole the money from the party. We cannot afford it. My problem with you personally, that instead of stepping up and helping the party, you're taking it out on social media and making public posts. On top of that, in those personal messages that Jocelyn sent, she specifically stated that you and Joe have been investigating this since August, and therefore you and Joe knew about this problem. From what I remember Shaden posting, that if you knew about this since August, why was this not brought up to everybody's attention? If you knew that there were unauthorized transactions happening in August, why did you not tell them? And here is the problem, Jake. I personally do not think that you were aware that there were any unauthorized transactions in August. I think you became aware of them at the same time as everybody else did. I trust that you have good enough character and are an honorable enough person that if you knew that there were unauthorized transactions back in August, everybody else would know about it. I trust the fact that you have honor. The problem is that the message that was portrayed defamed not only a person that we know is causing a problem, but also put you in a bad light. And that's when I had to step in and say, any defamatory statements have got to stop, because gossip in the legal world is a defamation lawsuit. So I don't owe you any apology. Who owes you an apology is a person who portrayed you as somebody who knew that you who knew about unauthorized transactions back in August and did nothing about it. I personally know Jake Porter, who has stayed in my house multiple times, who I have considered being my friend since 2014, would not do something like that. So if you have a problem with somebody making statements about you, start looking at your very close circle first, and then trash everybody else on Facebook.
Well,
Hey, can we move past this, guys?
Now, I want to say one more thing. Ed Wright has been a friend of mine for 15 years. Ed Wright asked me why I did not inform him when we noticed something was going on. Ed, I did, and you never responded to me. I informed you. I sent the entire State Central Committee a complaint back at the beginning of August that ethics reports were not being filed. No one ever responded. Well, a few people did respond to that complaint. No one, as far as I'm aware of, ever responded to the Judicial Committee complaint. And I think that was out of line to make that accusation.
What are you talking about? You withdrew the complaint because the ethics report was filed. Did we know that it was a not appropriate, not accurate ethics report? No, we did not. But you withdrew your complaint because eventually it was filed.
The board did nothing to stop it. The board waited around.
Waited around on what? You filed the complaint on August 11th, and the report was filed on, I believe, August 17th.
They waited around to give access to Nathan or to whoever the treasurer was going to be. They waited for that. They waited to hold Mike accountable. They allowed him to miss multiple meetings. And then you have Ed saying that, why didn't you tell me something was going on? And then never responding.
So if
Jake,
I
this is Ed. I have been quiet so far. I was in the hospital with the threat of losing my leg or my life from August 3rd through August 19. Before that, I did not have the knowledge to access my LPIA email. You personally have had my personal phone number and my personal email for decades, practically, certainly since the early 2000s. You could have called me.
And I did attempt to call you, and I'm sorry I couldn't reach you. I thought the best thing to put this one in was the LPIA email,
Which I hadn't been able to access for months.
No, neither was I. I just sent from my personal accounts because I was not getting emails from the committee.
You've had my personal phone number and my personal email for many years, Jake.
I think that is what the email piece is, something that I think we should just make kind of clear as well, that like at the same time all this has been happening, when I was reaching out, in July and June, reaching out to members of the board saying, hey, I want to help, but my emails go nowhere. I believe we found that the email server was broken. We had to open a ticket with LP National to get the email servers fixed. Mr. Green was doing tests where he was sending emails from his email to his personal and finding that the emails weren't working half the time. And so at the time, though, we were operating as our chair. Mike Connor was our de facto IP director. So that's another thing we've done, is now we have a dedicated state IT director, Mr. Benjamin Held, who has gotten those things fixed, has already made a bunch of other changes in terms of getting CRM access for people and doing things that many of us were recommending we do in terms of posting our events, et cetera, et cetera. If I could real quickly though respond, Jake, just to 2 points you raised. One was maybe the idea of a press release not being sent to the press. It's a blog post, and it being posted on midnight. So for the second press release, at least, I mean, I don't, in the public meeting, I said, guys, if you know people in the press, forward it on, invite the, maybe someone will pick it up, go ahead and publish it. I'm not sure what else it makes sense to do, but again, I'm not, let's say an expert or claim to be on how to appropriately format a press release. To me, the point was we wanted to say that there have been unauthorized transactions and we want to have a public meeting to clear the air. In terms of it was posted at midnight, I mean, the SEC, we stayed on the meeting quite late into the night, and as after actually I left to call it a night, and they said, hey, it's technically the 15th, let's just post it now, the sooner the better. I feel like if we were talking about public access television, then I feel like the argument would hold more weight that posting it at midnight, like no one's going to watch TV at midnight. You're trying to hide something, but I'm not sure I even understand the complaint about posting something at midnight, because an email goes out, it's in your email box. It gets posted at midnight or noon, it's posted on the website. It's not like it changes your ability to view it. So I really don't even understand the concern.
There's an algorithm issue of people not seeing it when you post it that time would be the complaint there.
But seeing it from what algorithm? From like, what do you mean, like a Google search?
On social media. Because people probably, I don't think there's been emails put out. We did eventually put out an email, and I appreciate that on this subject.
Let me just say, I mean, I'll put it this way. We were relieved that, like, okay, again, once we felt like we've given the documents to the prosecutor, we felt like, okay, now we have something. So I'll put it this way, guys. It was also a judgment call of like, from the LP training that we just did with regional, about how do you handle a crisis? What kind of press release do you put out? And the idea of putting out a press release when there is nothing but bad news and we don't know what we're doing. We haven't completed the analysis. We don't know who took it or how much. We don't know what we're going to do next. That didn't feel like a wise thing to put out there. And so so on the one hand, there was, I think, Jules' legitimate concern around defamation. But frankly, I was looking at it more from how do I protect the brand of the party? And by protect, I mean balancing it between like, hey, these things have happened. How, to me, I was working within, like, if we can get this done within 30 days, that's pretty solid to gather the analysis, know that we're speaking from facts, and being able to put something out there that is not just super negative, but also like, hey, we've handed the evidence over to the police. Now let's talk about how to positively move forward. And this is me with no skin in the game in terms of worrying about how it's going to look like if I want to point blame at people that were previously in the SEC or something. Like, most of the bad actors are gone. Now what's left are people that are trying to turn things around. So that's kind of just how I viewed it. And for the first press release, yeah, there was differences of opinions around like, well, what should we put out? Because we didn't have the evidence yet. We were just saying, like, should we say that he was removed for negligence? Like, what should we put out? And ultimately something was put out and it was voted on by people and it was debated and changed, and, and what came out came out. So I just don't think, I mean, I'll put it this way. I know that no one in an SEC meeting, in the closed door section or the public ones, ever were saying like, we're trying to lie, we're trying to confuse, we're trying to cover things up. It was just about how quickly can we ascertain the facts and be in a responsible position to put things out there. At least that's how I was thinking about it.
If I could jump in, Jake, I know you on your Facebook post, you questioned the midnight releases. That is my fault. I wanted to get it out as quick as possible, and I didn't even think about the social media algorithms when posting it. So in the future, I will set it to schedule to post in the middle of the day to alleviate that.
Thanks. So that's what I've wanted, people to take responsibility, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy with what you said, and I also want to commend you for. I think you moved to make sure that we paid off our bills on time, and I think it was a strong libertarian stance. So I really appreciate you and Nathan, and also Gordon as well. I want to give a special shout out to Gordon for his leadership early on in this.
Yeah, we
And
did. We
also
did pay
Benjamin,
Kirkwood, by the way.
for his work as well.
Please don't. Jake, I know I'm not part of that scene, and I'm sorry. Your posts have made me rethink my stepping up over the last month. And I want you to understand that when you go on a tirade and talk about things, dude, I had your name in my front yard. And to see you trash people like Nathan and Clyde and others who are taking care of an issue they did not do. I'm sorry, dude. Don't thank me. You've made me rethink everything that I've done in the last month and whether or not I want to go forward.
Well,
I'd like to say a few things if I can, Nathan.
yeah, please.
Just keep LPIA
Please break the
past
silence.
state chair
Yeah.
a number of years ago. I attended the meeting, I think last month when Ed was nominated chair. There's a lot of emotions involved tonight, and people are gonna have some time to think this through, how much, where their commitments are and where they're, how they're gonna move forward in the party. I was impressed last month when you guys met, the Central Committee, of the different expertise that are currently on that committee between, financial, accounting, legal, HR. Everybody stepped up and gave input on what their personal lives and what their personal experiences provided. And I was very impressed. Everybody in the committee listened and respected people's views and input. And that's something we never had before. We were always just a really shoestring group. So I'm really happy with, the people that have stepped forward. And maybe they stepped forward in the last 3 months. I don't know. I was fortunate, I guess, when I was in the party, we had a treasurer, had been a treasurer, I don't know, for 20 years, Tim, and he just took care of things. And then we had something new came along, we had a new treasurer. So that transition wasn't real smooth. So anyway, I keep positive about things, and we're going to have issues. Mostly are going to be generated from outside of our organization that we have to work together and work through. Sometimes it'll be internal. This one's really hard because it's somewhat self-inflicted pain. And those are the tough ones that, we look back, it's like, well, if I knew this, we could have done this. And that happens in business, it happens in life. The other thing I'd like to mention, and this has been true, Ed can contest this too. Our state chair, we put a lot of duties on the state chair. And to me, the three stressors, I think the committee needs to know, the three stressors are the annual state convention. That's the least amount one. But just time in that day, getting everything, have enough time to talk about things. The second biggest stressor is maintaining officers. And that's sort of what happened here, where you lost a treasurer, secretary, and just trying to get quorum at meetings. And that is a tough, that comes and goes. I was state chair the first year or two, we could never get quorum, so we couldn't even do business. And then we got over that, we had quorum. The biggest stressor is every 4 years, that presidential election where somehow, the state chair is in charge of petitioning for the presidential candidate. And then there's a guy called Bill Redpath that calls and just is very dominating. Where's your signatures? You don't have enough. You need like 3 times of what you're supposed to have. So those are the stress. I mean, the annual state convention, Maya really stepped up and took over that. I think we got that one having some support. But maintaining officers, getting good officers is important, as well as every 4 years we need to have somebody really lead the charge in that petition thing. That frees up your state chair, and probably nothing to do with what happened to this chair, but I know he helped with those things. But in the future, those are the ones that the state chair has a life too, and they can get busy. And then some other things that a business that should happen doesn't happen. A lot of that's maintaining whatever's in that bylaws. It's really the state chair doesn't do it. Nobody else seems to sometimes doesn't step up. And some of that just because you have, in this case, I think a lot of people were new on the Central Committee that did, well, this is how they function. You didn't really know. That's what they saw. And so they just said, well, they thought this is how we function. And in some ways, that's how we do function. So anyway, that's my words of wisdom. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I haven't met you before. What's your name again?
Oh, Keith Lauby.
Keith, nice to meet you. Thank you for saying all that. That was super helpful for me.
So the only thing that I'm really concerned about, can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, is the whole timeline from that you showed from 2017, 2018. If you can go back to that again.
The one with the ethics reports, or
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So yes, this one. So it is quite possible. I mean, we were doing a lot of work that year. So it is quite possible that we were taking in money from booths that didn't fit into that month's expenditures and taking in. Does that make sense? It's quite possible that we were doing a lot of work, because I know we were, and bringing in money, and it wasn't being reported because it wasn't happening until the next month. Does that make sense?
I guess what's still on my kind of to-do list, because like in Texas, when I was treasurer PAC, there was a very clear threshold on like only if you have expenditures or donations that exceeded $100 in the reporting statement, then you had to show all the individual things. And otherwise you could just have it like it'd be a lump sum and like, okay, here's the people that donated over $100 in the 6 months. But then I also got these $2,000 in $20 donations. And I didn't have to itemize those people. I don't know how I was going to be. Again, it's on my to-do list when I meet with the ethics reports folks next week. So maybe what you're saying could make sense, but I don't know. I kind of, again, this just wasn't what I expected to see when I thought like, oh, I'll compare. Because I kind of thought I would see when were the ethics report correct, and then when did they start getting off, and that would have been part of the evidence of like, hey, when this person took office, this is when it started getting weird. And when I saw this instead, I was like, I don't even know what to make of this, but I might as well show people because.
Yeah, I think there is an explanation, and I think Joe can probably help with it. But I mean, during those months, we were bringing in money because we were doing work. We were doing a lot of work. So if you see the orange that you had and where they land, it goes down during convention, but then comes right back up, right? Because we would have had convention and we would have had more money, but we wouldn't have actually needed to report it until the next filing when it did come back up, right?
I guess the way I'm thinking of it though is by definition, if you're depositing money in the bank, it means the donation had already occurred in the past, right? And what I was looking at was, and when you file a report, it's all the activity up to that day. So if the reporting period ends on 10/14, you still have like 2 more weeks to file it, because the idea is, hey, give me breathing room to figure out everything that was true up until the 14th and then file it. So like when I've been treasurer, it's always been like, okay, the balance I report to the ethics board should be down to the penny exactly what's in my bank statement. That's how I did double entry bookkeeping to ensure that I didn't make any mistakes.
Yeah, no,
this is Ed. I have something to add to this dialogue.
Sure.
I think in the past, it has been pretty commonplace for members to do in-kind donations. And sometimes those are not reported for months after they occur. And since those are in-kind donations, they would have no effect at all on cash in the bank account. You know, for example, if I spent $100 out of pocket on stationery or signage, and I don't ask for reimbursement at all, but rather simply file it later as an in-kind contribution, it has never flowed into the bank account and it never flows out of the bank account. And I think that's happened quite a few times in the past.
Yeah, but I guess there is a separate thing for in-kind contributions, right? And then there's just cash on hand. And that's what I was looking at, was the cash on hand when I compared it. So I was trying to be apples to apples, but maybe there is an explanation that I'm missing. But again, it's because I didn't want to, I'm not trying to create a new problem if one doesn't exist. And again, when I talk to the ethics board, it's not like they're going to be worried about this thing. They just want me to make a lump sum update and get things matching and then matching going forward. But yeah, to me, if there's a line item that says cash on hand at the end of the reporting period, that should probably match the cash on hand in your bank account.
Yeah. Can I jump in here, please? This is Rick. I've been filing those ethics reports for multiple years, and I guarantee you that the amount of money that's in the bank account should match exactly with the amount of money that your ethics report says is in your bank account to the penny. Ed is completely right about the in-kind donations, but those two numbers are the numbers that have to match. Otherwise, you have filed an inaccurate ethics report.
Yeah, I think this is Joe Howe, and I spoke with Nathan about this a few weeks back. So my thought is, at some point there was something that's misreported. We look back all the way to 2017 when the account was moved to Wells Fargo, and that's all the information we had. So if you look at the period from 17 through March of, well, through August of 2020, there should be no issues as far as any improper charges. Both myself, Myra worked through that. Jake was in there, Jules was in there, and we had to pick up the pieces as officers after our treasurer completely ghosted on us. So that was noticed, and we just didn't have any paperwork past 2017.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. Again, especially when, like, guys, it's a volunteer organization. At the end of the day, like that's in terms of passions are high right now, and obviously there's been times over the last week where I've been red mad about that we're in this position, and it's like, is this what I signed up for, to be the treasurer? And a week later, this happens, right? But I think the key thing is like, again, it's a volunteer organization. We're as strong as we are with people willing to come and step up and are willing to take on responsibilities. And especially if the treasurer piece, as they said earlier, when again Tim was doing it for 20 years, it's like you take it for granted how important that is, because if the fiduciary responsibility of the treasurer to have access to the bank account, to take the time to make sure the numbers match, and then if that's just goes away and people are scrambling to figure out usernames and passwords and trying to figure out where the statements are and where the receipts are and how to get access to this or that, and people have lives and families, it can be tough. So again, this isn't meant to bring up open a new can of worms, but it was something that, given that a lot of the evidence we're handing over to the detectives is based on looking at the Wells Fargo accounts in 2020 and comparing it to what was filed during that time, to show that at a minimum it wasn't authorized, let alone if it was more fraudulent or criminal. It just seemed like this was relevant to kind of, at least for me, to bounce this off the team and make sure, like, am I looking at this right? because it doesn't seem right. Um,
Are there any legal questions that I can answer before I sign off? I have to deal with a home situation, so I apologize.
Do I have
Is
to pay
there
my
anybody
taxes?
that, say that again?
Do I have to pay my taxes?
Unfortunately, yes.
it's voluntary.
Jules, I've got a question for you. A question and a suggestion.
Go ahead.
So tonight, joining us on the call is a representative from the Libertarian Party of Arkansas. I believe Jocelyn Jeffries is here tonight.
Okay.
Does she have any questions for Jules regarding legal parameters in this case? I want to make sure all of our questions get answered this evening. Thank you.
Well, hearing none, I'm gonna wish everybody a good night. If somebody, most of you have my cell phone, text me if you need it. If you have any questions for me directly, I will be more than happy to talk to you. I have a 3-hour drive to mediation tomorrow one way, so I'll be in the car for 6 hours. So anytime anybody has any questions, feel free to call me and I'll be available tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Jules.
Bye.
Hey, Nathan, Keith here. As far as treasury, you said we paid the Kirkwood Hotel. Is there, I guess, how's the solvency of our, what upcoming bills do we have, and do we have money to cover those in the next couple of months?
Yeah, great question. I'll actually share. I think to me it feels appropriate. I mean, because this is the same thing I shared at a public SEC meeting, so it's not like this is anything behind closed doors. But this is what I presented to the team on November 14th. So at the time, we had this balance of $8,000, but this is before we paid the Kirkwood Hotel. There was also a budget of $2,600 for this convention. Now, this budget was earmarked by a particular donor, giving this money specifically to spend on particular things, because we have a very exciting state convention planned, even though we're honestly, we're putting it together last minute, right? In previous years, I think Meyer would have had it all shaped up and done long ago, but it is what it is, the situation we're in. And so it was just on this last committee meeting on the 14th that we formally voted and approved on a particular plan for the state convention. And again, with this 2,600. So point being is we're sitting at about $900 of a money in the bank. So when in terms of now that we've paid off Kirkwood, actually I take it back. That $973 reflects if we have to pay off the $200 to the ethics board. But again, when I chatted with them, they made it sound like even though we've missed the deadline for filing an appeal, he said that based on the situation, the person I was talking to thought for sure they'll forgive that $200 penalty. So in that case, it wouldn't be 973, it would be 1173 as our balance. One thing that I will be taking to the next SEC meeting is the proposed budget for next year. Now, according to the bylaws, we're supposed to vote on a budget 60 days before the convention. With the convention date of January 29th, that puts us at December 1st, or not December 1st, November 30th, as 60 days before. And luckily we have this next meeting on the 28th. Now, per the bylaws, it seems like the intent of the budget is just to say, what are the things that are kind of pre-approved that the future SEC does not have to vote on? And so what my plan is to take is just to look at what are our true reoccurring monthly or yearly expenses. Right now, all I've really identified is the monthly banking charge of $10.60 and our monthly MailChimp expenditure of about $85. So that's all I'm going to be taking to say, hey, here's the pre-approved budget. Therefore, anything else for the next SEC would be they would need to vote on, which to me kind of sounds like. So again, if crowdsourcing here, if we're aware of any other expenses that come up yearly that maybe I've missed as I've gone through all the statements from Wells Fargo, at least, that we think should be added, feel free to email me or let me know. I think there is.
I think there's a PO box charge of $25 a month or somewhere around there too.
I believe Mr. Green paid that. And Mr. Green, I don't know if that just came out of your, that was an in-kind donation. Maybe I need to record.
I'm going off the top of my head here. I did pay to have the mailbox rekeyed. But as far as the that's billed annually, and that is something that did get paid. And I think the PO box is paid through September, but I think that's an annual thing, and I think that showed up somewhere on, I think in August or September, that it was paid. That was one of the bills that got paid.
Hooray.
Thanks, Nathan. I just gotta make sure there's no outstanding bills that we don't know about. And I should disclose, I'm not a member of the Iowa organization. I moved to Colorado, so I'm a Colorado member, but I still have interest in Iowa. So thank you for your information.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
I mean, as Myra said on a call, I think last week, you know, it took a while, a lot of hard work and a lot of years for us to have been in the situation where we had about $10,000 in the bank. And so it is pretty devastating that this chain of events and a particular bad actor can wipe that away. But, you know, Jules is working the legal avenues to see what we can reclaim, right? And I think the only other option then is to just, at least the way I'm looking at it is like, well, kind of a positive attitude of, okay, well, I can't control the controllables. I can't control what happened in the past, but I can control my actions moving forward. So what are we going to do differently? And what are we going to do to make the best of the situation we're in? And so, yeah, with $900 as now our balance, what are the things that we expect? What are the, you know, and how do we use this from a fundraising perspective so that we can support our amazing governor candidate, Mr. Rick Stewart, so that we can focus on what we should be focusing on is having a successful state convention and supporting Rick to get 2% next year, right? So my goal, guys, with this meeting is really that, like, I'm glad that, put it this way, if the emotions were going to run hot, I'd rather them run hot now, and so we can move forward and have a productive state convention in January and really focus on what the reason we all care and are passionate about this is we care about the Libertarian Party and liberty in our lives and influencing what happens in Iowa. And again, we have an amazing governor candidate that we should be doing everything we can to support. And I just want us to be able to, like, if there's more things that people want to get off their chest, like, let's hash it out now, because I really don't want this stuff to come back up at the state convention. To the extent if there's particular things we want to tweak in the bylaws or whatever that we think will be an improvement, then great, yeah, let's solve that part of it there. But in terms of you know, anything else that's not going to be productive, I'd much rather clear the air here and allow us to move forward and focus on positive things that we can control.
Nathan, since this come up a couple of times about the audit committee, I believe at a previous meeting, Jules and I were named to the audit committee. How do you foresee working going forward? Because up to this point, there really hasn't been anything to audit, correct? I mean,
well, yeah, I just got access to the bank account November 4th, right? So at the end of the day, I'm not even sure how, you know, what was expected or the SOPs for the audit committee worked before, but from my perspective now, it's like, okay, if it makes sense that only certain people have true access on our signatories on the bank account, like at this point, the chair and the treasurer, then how do we make it not just auditable for an audit committee, but auditable, frankly, for anyone in the SEC? And that's what we're doing with, I'm exporting every monthly statement, putting it on the Google Drive for the SEC, And my plan is to go into, Stripe and those other things that where donations are coming in, put those there. If there's receipts and someone wants to get paid for whatever, if we're going to hire someone to collect signatures, whatever it is, we put the receipts there too. And
So as a member of the last audit committee that I know has ever existed so far, what used to happen was Tim Hurd would give us a binder, paper documents of everything, all of the bank statements, all of the receipts, all of the donations, copies of checks, copies of everything. And four of us would drink heavily while we went through these documents and made sure that month by month everything lined up and was checked off. And then we would pass each month to, like, there were 3 people, so all 3 of us would verify that everything added up. It was not a good time, but it was necessary, and it had to be done, I believe, 30 days before convention.
Is there a bylaw that says how many people on, as far as I know, and Clyde, maybe you can step in and say how many from the minutes. Is it just me and Jules? Is there someone else?
It was only you two. I mean, Nathan can't be on it, of course, because of conflict of interest. But as far as the bylaws, it says an audit committee shall be appointed by the state central committee. An audit shall be conducted prior to each regularly held state convention. So I don't see a timeline, but.
Okay, and there's no requirement how many people, and so it's fine. If it's just me and Jules, and I guess I will throw that out there. The people on this call are obviously invested. Is me and Jules enough? Or does anyone else want to step up? I know this isn't me, but
I also need volunteers for bylaw and platform committees if people are interested.
Jack volunteered for both, apparently. Oh, for audit.
Perfect.
Jack, email me.
No, too late. He gets on both.
He gets on both. Apparently,
Yeah.
he gets on both. All right, Jack,
That's how
email
this
me.
works.
Okay.
You volunteer, you raised your hand.
I know it was brought up earlier.
Too.
I know it was brought up earlier about having assistant treasurer. So we should probably also have an assistant secretary to avoid any issues if I can't make it to a meeting or something of that nature. So if you're interested, please contact me and let me know. I will put my email in the chat.
Hey, question. Is there any way we can make this audit committee a little bit more permanent that could meet like on a quarterly basis? So then we can check the books regularly, so then something like this doesn't happen again?
So I'll just take this because I've been looking at other states' websites as I try to figure out what we're missing and things like that. Some of the other states do have permanent committees. I mean, they have permanent bylaws, platform, audit committees, and those are listed on the website. And this is, I guess more of a question for the SEC, but like, do they want to have a permanent committee that's consistent throughout the year? And what kind of requirements they want on that?
I wouldn't object to it because it's going to happen again if we don't, if we don't keep an eye on it. Because obviously we trusted, but we didn't verify it. And that's how this happened.
Then Dave, I fully expect you to propose that at the next meeting.
Okay.
Just related to that, to me, that might be overkill if we are following what the procedures that have already been put in place by Nathan of having the report and the bank of statements available, etc. That should stop anything pretty much immediately without having to the having a quarterly audit seems to be creating more work and overkill if we have the other safeguards in place.
That said, David, if I do 4 quarterly audits, they take less time than one yearly audit.
Possibly.
That's a valid point.
And the other thing is too, guys, like let's say like lately in the last 30 days, we've been meeting like weekly pretty much. But let's say we get into a cadence where the SEC meets more or less monthly, let's say. Well, if there's a treasurer report every month, then every month the treasurer is saying, here's what our balance was, here's what our new balance is, and here's what happened in between that made it go up and down, right? That makes it super easy to audit because the main way you audit is you compare balance statements. You start with your beginning balance, you add all the money that came in, you subtract all the money that came out, and then you say, does this number equal the new balance? If it matches to the penny, audit complete. If it's off, I screwed up somewhere, I'm missing something. And then you go figure out what that thing is wrong is. So if we're having treasury reports every month, you're always able to keep the world of things you're checking within those month-to-month views. And now you're just looking like on a one-pager. Like, okay, we got 5 donations in and we had 3 expenses. Looks good. It is much more difficult when it's a year's worth of stuff.
I think what people have started to see though is that we received such a sheet in front of us during convention and it was not correct. So the fact of the audit is to make sure that those numbers that you're providing are correct, right?
No, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't have an audit. I'm just saying I agree that it'll be easier to do because I'm going to make it so that you don't, because again, it's a longer spreadsheet. If you're starting with what was the balance January 1st, and I'm going all the way to June, and I'm going to add and subtract all these numbers and see if they match. If they don't match, now I got 6 months of stuff to figure out like what went wrong. Right. But if now I'm giving everyone bite-sized pieces, like, hey, who wants to audit this month's treasury report?
Right.
And it's just like, here it is. It's a one-pager. 3 things here, 5 things there. And oh, here's an asterisk by this one thing because it says this, but here's the explanation. Like, it doesn't have to be like this big. I'll be damned if I'm going to send everyone a binder full of documents. Like, I want to give them just the raw PDFs.
Fun, Nathan. It's so fun. It's a good time.
Yeah. So guys, again, in the spirit of like ensuring that those that are earnestly like the desire to move forward and be a part of the solution and help move the party forward, like, are there still any concerns that we feel like we didn't address? What could we have done differently? Like, are there still concerns out there that either, we can talk through? So I really would be disappointed if, again, I'm not on Facebook, but then if your stuff continues, it's like, well, wait, like, then this meeting failed. Because at least part of the goal was to air this stuff out and, come to an understanding.
Yeah, okay. I have one issue that I just want to bring up. Apparently, there was some criticism of the secretary's minutes for not including the names of the people who were not members of the SCC in those minutes. It's my understanding that in this kind of a meeting, you would not necessarily include the name of everybody that showed up, for instance, at a public meeting where there's 200 people complaining about some school board issue. I don't know if you put the name of everybody that appeared at that meeting in the minutes of that meeting. On the other hand, if a person grabs the mic for 2 minutes, or in Cedar Rapids you get 5 minutes, then that person would be recorded in the meeting minutes. But the people that just sat in the audience and didn't do anything, I don't know. I think I don't think I don't think that's a fault of not including the minutes. It's an open meeting. And the important thing is the people that were making decisions, and then also the people that were officially speaking. Just my opinion.
I will say I added those names at the beginning of the meeting and only included those who talked during the meeting. If I got names of people who didn't talk, it's because they were there at the beginning of the meeting. And in the previous minutes before I was here, no one recorded guests.
Anyone else wants to, questions, concerns, complaints?
What are you listening to?
A meeting of the Iowa Libertarian Party about.
Joe,
I
you're
do.
you want to mute yourself, buddy.
Hello?
Hello? We hear you.
Yeah, this is Shayton Windler, former SEC member. Yeah, I just really want to say one quick thing because I just read a message that was actually concerning. It's okay to say that I went overboard or maybe I went off on the wrong information. Call me retarded. I really don't give a flying fuck. To say that I made threats to anyone is actually ridiculous. One thing only. I've never made a single threat to anyone. It's okay to say I was wrong. It's okay to say I didn't know what I was talking about. Call me names. I don't care. But to say that I made actual threats to anyone, Jocelyn, talking about you. That is it.
All right.
I'll just throw one last thing out there. So everyone on the Judicial Commission now have an LPIA email, and there is a judicial-committee@lpia.org email account that if anyone has concerns, they can email that, and it goes to all 4 members. So as we try to move towards a better lines of communication, please, if you have ideas, let me know. I will put this out there. But
Is that going to get updated on the website, Mr. Held?
that is updated on the website.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I've been in and out and haven't been as engaged in this as I wanted to be because of other things going on, but I would just like to take a moment to thank Mr. Clefman for the very professional, well-prepared presentation that he did. It obviously there was a huge amount of time put into having everything set up, and I just want you to know, Nathan, that that's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Here. Yes, thanks a lot, Nathan. This was an excellent meeting.
All right, can we stop the recording so I can start drinking?
I have a question. This is Amanda Howe. I am Joe Howe's wife. A lot of you do know me, but I am not registered Libertarian at the moment, and I would be happy to change that and maybe be involved in some form, like on an audit committee. I do not want a large role, but speaking from our household and Joe being the former chair, it is disappointing to see what has happened and all of the mess that has come from this. I did put in the chat as well, not trying to be mother duck here in this situation, but all of you do have very long relationships with one another and friendships, and the actions of one person kind of led to the boiling over of a lot of people's passions about the party. And I do think it's just important that people move forward and move on, and apologize where an apology is needed. And, there are a lot of bigger issues that the party here in Iowa, can have an impact on, where, personal freedoms and, CBD laws and all of these things that you guys get very passionate about. Don't let that fall aside because you're irritated with somebody on a Facebook post. If you can't get along with somebody over Facebook, block them and move on. But the reality of what this group is for is to impact those policies, find incredible candidates to put those messages forward. And that's what people should be focusing on, in my opinion. And if there's something that I can do, in a small role, like be on an audit committee, I would love to do that. I just didn't know if I would need to be a fully registered libertarian for 6 months to do that.
Thank you so much for that, Amanda. I don't believe you have to be registered for 6 months, but if you were, let's say, going to go to the state convention and maybe part of the audit committee was going to present their findings there, to be a voting delegate, we will be having our caucuses on January, what is it, Mr. Stevens, the 9th? 8th, sorry. Yes, the 8th, the Saturday. So anyone would have to be a registered libertarian by the 8th or sign the document on the 8th to then be a state voting delegate or eligible to then go to the state convention and be a delegate.
Thank you very much. And again, just fantastically ran meeting, very informative, very professional. And I very much looking forward to seeing what, those of you that are on the committee will bring to the next committee, that same level of professionalism and just keeping that positive attitude and wanting to move forward and focus on what the party really should be focusing on. So big kudos to you for that. Great job.
Thank you. All right. So again, anyone else want to clear the air on anything? Or do we all agree we're going to hold him to be friends moving forward on Facebook? And it's honor system, because I'm not on Facebook. I won't be able to monitor and find out for sure.
Yeah, and I was going to speak a few minutes ago, but and someone else, which not you, Amanda. But I'll say this, and I understand, throughout this call, the reasons were given by Jules and so forth about, the timeline for communication. And, I was invited to review some of the press releases since I had some experience doing that as the former chair as well. And some of them were much stronger and much more transparent. That if they would have been shared early on, that a lot of the rumors, the bad feelings, innuendo, I've been told I'm at fault for this, for God's sakes. A lot of this, I think, would have been prevented. And, we can argue about what the content should have been. I don't think it should have been, hey, Mike Connor did X, Y, and Z. But honestly, it's very disappointing that a lot of this happened. And I'm talking about after the discovery, right? Because we have people at each other's throats. I've certainly been upset. And I think that, regardless of the reasoning, I think that the Central Committee needs to look at how other people would see things. Post at midnight, post a month later. And to me, it raises a lot of questions. And honestly, if there would have been a fairly strong release a month ago, this meeting would never have happened. So that's just my opinion. And I know people may differ on that or have reasons they did one thing or the other. But looking at crisis management, being transparent from the get-go, as much as you can be, is important. And I don't think it was followed quite often. So again, that's more of a statement, not a question, but I just want to get that off my chest.
I'm encouraging statements. I mean, this is the soapbox, and I'd rather have the soapbox here than at the state convention. So I implore people, even if you don't have a question, thank you, Joseph Howe. Thank you for that. Yeah, I totally agree that judgment calls were made on wording and what to release and different things, and different people could have made different decisions.
With that, will the SEC then consider appointing some sort of committee to plan out communications? So it's not reliant upon one person when they have the opportunity to do so, but therefore plan, hey, this is gonna go out then, this is gonna go out that, communication about specific events coming up, making sure there's not incorrect information going out, etc.
Again, it's in the bylaws that we have the power to appoint a communications director, right? You know, I mean, again, the reality, guys, is again, as a volunteer organization, we're as strong as the people that show up and decide to take on responsibility and help. So if part of the problem has been that, you know, some of the SEC members like weren't showing up, and then, you know, like it's even harder than to then find additional auxiliary people to fill department chairs and stuff. But that is what we need to be doing. And I do believe that, you know, how do you get an active and engaged membership? We'll give them a job and they're going to keep coming up and showing up, make them feel important. So, you know, we do envision how to move forward, how to get beyond this point and look for a brighter future for the LPIA, where there are going to be roles that people can say, hey, I you know, can kind of define your level of commitment. I don't want to have this much responsibility, but give me this much. This I can carve out 2 hours a month or whatever it is, and let's give people things to do, ways to feel valued, and things that we can hold them accountable to do. And yeah, so communications director is one of them, but then wouldn't that be great if we had then a communications committee? People can volunteer in different ways. So that's definitely something we're looking forward to do. And again, for those that have been on this call and frustrated or just curious or whatever, if there's a way that you feel like you can be passionate and help, then please don't hesitate to reach out, and we welcome it.
And Nathan, I will say, you know, one thing, I had talked to Mike at one point about helping out with communications, and I'm sure other people were in contact with him. There are probably a lot of people out there that want to do stuff that maybe thought they were going to and didn't get that opportunity. I know there was a young man over in Sioux City that was wanting to help that, Mike had probably given him some tasks, but I don't know if there was any follow-up.
Yeah.
So I think you'll find out there's quite a few people that do want to do help and do want to.
You bring up a great point, like the damage control aspect. It's not just that this person is suspected of all these unauthorized transactions and the damage that's been done to our wallet, but there's also the damage of credibility that during his tenure, which is the same reason I reached out to you, Jake, back in like June or something, right? In Potawatomi, and I'm like, hey, I became a life member. No one reached out to me. There's nothing on the website. How can I even find out? Is there a member? Is there a party here locally? And I think we'll find that during his time, there's a lot of unanswered emails, and we need to reach out to those people and apologize and like, hey, we're sorry no one reached out to you. And some of it was even stuff just like the email server went down, as Mr. Green found out, and we had to get that fixed with our new IT director. So there's all, in addition to this stuff that we've been doing, that we've been talking about, there's also been a lot of other like basic stuff that we've been trying to build out as well, in terms of having an IT director, getting the emails working, getting access to the CRM, updating the website, like let alone the convention planning stuff, and let alone, hey, here's this backlog of volunteers that were ignored for 6 months after they reached out. Let's see if we can repair that relationship.
I think that's good. When you think about the opportunity cost, it's not $10,000. It's probably 20 or 30,000 or stuff we can't ever measure of the people that have, the friendships lost, the people that have just gone away. And, I think we're all here because we are passionate about the party. We do care about the party. And, I've been with this party since 2006 with the state party. I really want to see it succeed. And now more than ever, it's really needed to succeed.
Can I jump in here? I put this in the chat, but it's not clear to me that posting anything on the LPIA website is a proper method of communicating to all of our members. It might be a good way to communicate to some of them. For me, it just seems to me that if we're going to communicate with our members, it either has to be snail mail or email. And if people don't open their email, well, what can I say? They might not open their snail mail either. But I don't think that posting something on the LPIA website would come underneath my definition, personal definition of communicating with members. Probably because I'm selfish and I wouldn't get that communication.
Yeah.
I'm only thinking of myself here.
Rick,
and I open my emails. So anyway, that's just a thought.
Rick, I would say that we had to rip access from Mike for all of the accounts that we had. And it took us this long to get pretty much access to a lot of his accounts and wipe him off. I know that as far as MailChimp, which is what we use to send out mass emails, we didn't know how to use it. I know that Joe Howell knew how to use it, but I sent out the email of the press release to everyone's emails and linked it back to our website. I've kind of been using the website as the sole source of information and then linking to it if possible. But if there's another way to do that, just sending out emails, I mean, I'm all for it. I'm for transparency. I'm for blasting it out everywhere that it needs to be.
And the SEC just approved us to re-up the subscription for MailChimp last Sunday night, which Nathan did around midnight that night.
Clyde, I did notice that you were putting the meeting minutes on LPIA as well.
Yes, I've been trying to go through the backlog of the existing meeting minutes as well. I'm just trying to get them out on both sites, and on LPIA they'll permanently be there. So
now I think that you had found out that some of the old bylaws, constitution was out of date severely, at least a couple of years. Is that correct?
yes, and unfortunately the bylaws that I posted that were the ones that I believe Mike rewrote after the 2020 convention, they don't have the revision history on them. So
down at the bottom.
Yes, so I do plan on adding the revision history back into the bylaws before the convention, so that way we can keep track of it in a better way.
Where are these being stored at now? Was that on Google Drive or was
Yeah.
that an email list?
So just so everyone knows that there was all these Google Drives where personal people owned them previously. The info at LPI owns the Google Drive now. So whoever the next SEC is will own the data in the Google Drive.
Well, I found out that I was a backup on one of them because I got a notification on my email and I had no clue. So
yeah, I actually saw that the Google Voice, the voicemails was still, you were the backup still, and I
had no clue until I get the notification that I've been removed, and I thought, well, I thought that was done years ago.
Yeah, and so I made an active effort, and this was prior to Ben being put on as IT director, just to start centralizing everything back to an LPIA email, so that way it can always pass down, including these bank statements. So if 5 years down the road, someone wants to go back and audit our bank statements for some reason, they're there on the Google Drive for that SEC to look at. It is one of these things where in a normal business, you would centralize all that stuff to where you could remove and give access from a top level. So, because I had no access to Mike's Google Drive where all the information was out, and I was kind of had my hands tied together when I became secretary.
Now, is there a way to secure social media access to where someone just doesn't go and destroys everything on their way out? Because that seems like that could have happened here.
I did do that with our Twitter and Facebook accounts. They both route to the info at LPI email address, so the next SEC can remove anyone who's on those accounts. We are using TweetDeck with Twitter to delegate access, so that way no one has the password except for the party, the party account.
And I sent a proposal to David at one point about a like an exit checklist. So when a staff member were to leave, like what are the things we should go through to make sure that we have removed everyone's access to things along the line. That was prior to me knowing what we all have, and I don't know if we even know all we have, but we're working through that. But that's something that we'll have to formalize at some point, whether now or in the future, a form of onboarding and offboarding checklists for SEC members.
Yeah, I guess I have another question, just thinking, and I think this is for Joe. Help me out here. Joe, you were the chairman, and then Mike became the chairman. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So just from a person who has done my level best to never get involved in the SCC, but made the mistake of getting put on the judicial committee, which sprung into action this year. It sort of seems to me like things were pretty smooth and pretty like running pretty well, and things were getting done, and the money was in the till and all that. And then when we transitioned to a new chairman, just about everything went to hell for a variety of reasons. I don't know what any of them were because I really wasn't paying any attention at all at that point in time. But from my perspective today, it seems like we had treasurer problems, we have secretary problems, we have audit committee problems, we had communication problems, we have IT problems. Just like nothing seems to have worked very well since Mike took over. Am I the only one that sees that sort of an overview, or am I missing some part of the picture that I don't know what else happened? But is just one guy came in and didn't do anything and nobody noticed, and so it fell apart, or I don't know.
Well, I'm honestly shocked to learn that the first unauthorized transaction happened within a week of when I sat down at a Wells Fargo with Mike. He came to Cedar Rapids so that I could transfer the account over to him. And then it started happening that week. Like, that shocks me.
Myra,
It probably took him a week to get the debit card.
Exactly. It was like the day he got it in the mail.
It shocks me. Like, I sat in a Wells Fargo for 2 hours with him to transfer the bank account over. And that's like, I had no idea. It shocked me.
I think a lot of us feel pretty betrayed by this. And, Rick, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that happened. We had a secretary that never showed up to the meetings and or rarely did. And when she did, she was never able to produce minutes. She never took minutes. When Logan stepped forward in Mike's household to take the secretarial job temporarily, we all kind of sighed with relief that maybe we would see some minutes. And that was erratic at best. The idea that we had two officers under the same roof was a terrible idea in and of itself. I think those of us who recognized that thought that it was going to be a temporary thing. And then when the information necessary for our treasurer to fully access the bank account did not come forward, and Mike made excuse after excuse of why it hadn't happened yet and that it was going to happen and going to happen, mixed with the reports of his physical dilemmas. I think we were gracious and sympathetic, empathetic, and tried to, be kind, and it bit us in the ass.
It's really hard for libertarians to understand that other libertarians are bad. Like, we generally like to think that we all abide by the same rules of conduct, right? And theft is not one of those things that we do. And it's hard.
I will say that whenever I was trying to hand over the treasurer stuff, that I was supposed to meet with him, and Amy canceled the meeting with me. Said, "Oh no, I've got it. You've given me the stuff I need. I've got it. I can do it on my own." And that was, I thought, well, I guess it's not that difficult. I mean, you can pick it up, but maybe it's something that we look at a staggered board at some point. So we've always got people that have been on there before.
Well, I mean, I'll share something that Mr. Green informed me of, right? I mean, isn't it true, guys, that when Amy accepted the nomination or whatever at that in 2020, that her speech was something like, "I don't want to do this. I don't think I'm qualified, but I'll do it if you make me," type of thing. And it's like, again, we're the victims of who's willing to step forward in a volunteer organization. So from my perspective, again, like if the SCC says, "Hey, I am going to groom that deputy or alternate," and the membership kind of demands it, I'm not going to just vote for anybody. I'm gonna NOTA someone that's not qualified. Like, well, then by definition would be a stronger organization with more people and more engagement, right? But it's so it can either be a virtuous cycle of more people stepping up and having not just better candidates for political office, but better people willing to run for these positions within an SCC, or it can be a bad cycle of fewer and fewer people showing up, and then it's hard to, like, who's willing to do this damn job? And it feels like we're kind of at that end of the cycle, and hopefully now there's only one place to go but up, and we can start the beginnings of a virtuous cycle now, by saying, like, hey, as Rick just said, like, wow, it seems like everything got screwed up. And then again, throw COVID in at the same time, and it's like just more excuses for why it all happened. But if now is the time to dust off and say, okay, eye on the prize, move forward, then we can actually build back better, right?
Let's go,
I
Brandon.
have to say though, although Amy was not willing, I can't even say not a willing participant. She was proud to be treasurer. She took it on, and she became a delegate too. And we talked to her, on the online delegate process when we were doing the LNC stuff for the convention online. She was with us the whole weekend. She seemed comfortable, and she seemed happy to be in our group and working with us. So, I mean, while she was playfully reluctant, I can't say that anybody like jammed it down her throat either. I mean, she was still with us for quite a while. So
That's helpful context. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I saw Bethany weigh in. A lot of us do what we do reluctantly. I don't like politics. It's not my favorite thing to think about. I do it because I feel obligated. Somebody's got to do it. And it's an ancient problem. I mean, I forget which Greek philosopher said the problem with good people not engaging in politics is that they will be ruled by evil people. And that's our risk. And with the duopoly in DC, that's exactly what we see. It's important for us. And yes, Bethany, burnout is very real. It sure is.
Mr. Green has his hand up.
Oh, thanks. I did want to jump in and address what Rick had said about it seemed like everything went to shit when Mike came in. I think a bigger issue is that I think that things went to shit when the prior SEC that had things running smoothly all went away. That we went from, the SEC when I was elected was the only person I think that had been on SEC before was Ed. And I don't know what happened. I wasn't involved. The convention where I was elected was the first one that I ever attended. And it was, I don't know what happened, but there was, it was, here you go, sink or swim is the feeling that I've gotten from that. And it wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily Mike, it was everybody that had things going smoothly was no longer around, and that whatever institutional knowledge there was not passed on. And I mean, I think we're figuring it out. I feel like I'm figuring out my job finally, but I've never been contacted by whoever was the at-large rep before. I don't even know who it was. And, you know, let alone having a conversation with them. And I think that's something that the current SEC has talked about a lot to make sure that doesn't happen again. And yeah, actually, I'm looking here right on the screen. Point number 3 from Nathan is that SEC member replacement should have proper knowledge transfer. That's a huge thing that I know I will be focusing on.
Absolutely. I think it's so important, but I mean, you also have to understand that anybody can call me and I answer my phone all the time.
Yeah.
You know that, David, right? We talked on the phone a lot. And so I do feel a little responsible about that, but I've always been very available to everybody.
Yeah, go ahead. I could probably speak a little bit to that. You know, we did transition. I gave all my materials, all my knowledge to Mike, which apparently is a bad decision, but he had been on our committee for 6 months prior to the convention as well, had been a volunteer for our party. He had been in the party longer than I had. So what we thought would happen was we would pass on the knowledge and a phone would ring, email would hit us, you know, asking a question. And I didn't get a single inquiry by any central committee member until all this started happening this past late summer, early fall. And, you know, to be a leader, it's not just about, I mean, the chair before me split. He split. I had no transition whatsoever. He just took off and didn't appear until he wanted to be a delegate 2 years later. You got to figure it out quick. You got to ask questions. Joe Gleason was your predecessor. I mean, you sat next to him at, you know, half a dozen meetings since then in Polk County. You know, people need to ask questions. And even if you don't know what you're doing, you know, the bylaws stated out pretty well and pretty, you know, fairly clearly, at least the direction you should go in. You know, maybe there needs to be more of a transitional meeting between the outgoing and incoming committee. You know, a lot of these ideas I think are good, but you can't train up curiosity. You can't train up leadership skills. A lot of those things are, well, you can train up, you can develop them, but a lot of them are innate. And I was disappointed, you know, have our biggest convention ever, and almost every single position was not even contested. And, you know, Bethany said in the chat, people just fall into the spot sometimes, and, you know, you hope for the best. But again, at the same time, you know, I told Mike, I'm not going to try to give you a bunch of unsolicited advice. I sure have been lately. But at the time, my intent was to sit on the sidelines, and you know what? If they do things differently than I would, that's fine. As long as somebody's doing something, you know. And over time, that became more and more evident with big gaps in social media, gaps in communication, judicial committee complaints, you know, just snowballed that something was very wrong here until I got nosy enough to look at my old Gmail account here. So I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of word salad for me, but you know, people have to be seekers. People have to be curious. People have to wonder why bylaws aren't being followed. And if they're not being followed, they need to reach out to whatever judicial committee is at the time. So.
I was just going to say, for those that have been on the committee before, if you have not shared your phone number in the chat, that might be helpful. You know, being Mr. Howe's wife, Joe will talk libertarian politics, needs, he eats, breathes, sleeps it. So I married into the party, I guess I should say. But and Myra as well, and Jules and Jake, and all of these people that have put years of work in. David, of course you're new, and there are things that you may not know because you don't know what you don't know. But I can say from almost an outsider looking in, you guys all have an incredible team of people who do want to help. They do want you to pick up the phone, and they do want to answer your questions and make things better. So tap into each other, lean into the strengths that you guys have, which is each other, instead of tearing each other apart. Use each other as the resources for all of the knowledge that other people have.
Well said.
I would like to say that I wouldn't even be on the FCC right now if the Judicial Committee didn't receive a complaint. I didn't even know any of this was going on prior to this. And I'm glad I raised my hand at the convention. I nominate me for the Judicial Committee, even though I was told it would never meet. But I'm glad it got my butt in gear. I mean, having this.
Nice to have you, Clyde.
Yeah, thank you, Clyde.
You're here.
Can we end this meeting and talk about fun things?